Mac Pro or Mac Studio? I had to do that again. I have been testing these out for a few days now, and in this video, I will show you what you get for that extra $3,000 and if it's worth it, along with the M2 Ultra and the unbinned version that costs more. So Apple finally gave us this updated machine, and it seems like a bit of a disappointment. Now, many people have said, well, there has to be other things that you get. The thermals will be better. This cooling system is insane on the Mac Pro. So I'm gonna give you guys all of that info and my thoughts. Now, this Mac Studio comes in at $4,000. It is a 60 graphics core M2 Ultra, and the Mac Pro comes in at $8,000. It has the upgraded one like I mentioned, but of course that price tag is for this larger chassis. Now what's crazy is that this Mac Studio is crazy heavy. It is almost 8 pounds. It has that copper cooling system that is a couple pounds by itself. We tore this thing down and showed you guys that. But the Mac Pro is such a beast that even the box itself weighs over 32 pounds compared to 8. So this thing is a monster, but when you look inside, it is mostly empty, which is crazy. Now, it seems like Apple, instead of all the leaks and rumors we had, decided to just repurpose everything. There's actually been a lot of changes in here that I can mention, but even the power supply is 1,280 watts, which this whole system only needs about 200, even if you count certain cards. The power draw is very little. So Apple is kind of not caring. Now there's a couple other surprises with this setup, but first I wanna show you guys the external differences and the ports. Now the Mac Studio has that one fan compared to the Mac Pro, where we have 3 huge ones on the front that blow through this cooler that looks similar, but actually has a lower attachment point underneath that chip. On the other side, we actually have another fan that is built in there, and most of these just run at idle. Now the weird thing is, where we used to have RAM, well, that has a couple heat sinks, and the actual SSDs moved to a section that doesn't have active cooling coming in. Now I love that the Mac Studio has an SD card slot built in the front, along with those 2 ports that are Thunderbolt on the Ultra model, whereas the Mac Pro doesn't have that slot. They do have 2 Thunderbolt ports at the top, so I've often used those and plugged stuff in and sat it down on top. Same thing with the Mac Studio. It's so compact underneath the display that we set stuff on top. Now on the back of the Mac Studio, we have 4 more Thunderbolt ports compared to the Mac Pro that has 6 on the back, so it has 2 extra overall. We have an HDMI compared to 2 HDMIs on the Mac Pro. We also have 2 USBs on both, and the Mac Pro has 2 10 gigabit Ethernets compared to 1. Now for some people, that might be a big deal if you want to aggregate those or connect to different things, because on the Studio, you'd have to buy an external adapter. Now you might think that the Mac Pro can support more displays than the Studio. This thing can support 8 4K displays with its ports here, but no, both of these can support that. Even though here we don't have enough ports, you might have to do some daisy chaining, but both can even do 6K Pro Display displays. And pretty much every other capability is the same. You can get the same 192 gigs of unified memory, the same 8 terabytes of storage on both, but the thing is, even though the Mac Studio has the same SSDs that you can unconnect and swap, Apple only lets you do it on the Mac Pro. They actually sell those separately so you can upgrade them, but they lock down the Studio. With that said though, for the price of this Mac Pro 8 grand, for just $800 more, you can get the same 76 core M2 Ultra, but you can get 8 terabytes of SSD, you can get 192 gigs of RAM, compared to 64 gigs and 1 terabyte. So value-wise, that's a big difference. Now, I was surprised that the Mac Pro 1 terabyte model only came with 1 SSD card that was plugged in out of 2, but when I ran the speed test, the performance was the same between the 2 systems. So Apple's not making use of that extra slot. They could have made this a lot faster with the PCI-Express 4, but they didn't. Now, talking about those PCI slots, it has PCI-Express 4, but like in our previous video, what we uncovered and found is that the bandwidth is actually limited between these different slots. There's a switcher so that if you're maxing out the bandwidth on one, for example, I wanted to buy this and get an add-in PCI-Express 4 SSD, 64 terabyte card in here to make this a central server and editing rig. Well, the other ports are gonna slow down or your speed is gonna slow down. So that is a major bummer and a cost savings that Apple made. Now, yes, you can plug in different audio cards, capture cards into the system, and Apple said that it can actually ingest 24 4K streams at once. So that does matter for some people, but others have mentioned that now you can use external PCI enclosures with the Mac Studio or other Macs, so you don't really have to have this very expensive model. Costs $3 grand more just to have that. So that is a major difference. Now, what a lot of people have said is these things are gonna be thermally different. The Mac Studio will be loud and run hot compared to the Mac Pro, which will be silent. That is what I really wanted to focus on and test out, and the results were very interesting. Now, both the CPUs are the same. We have the same amount of RAM, and the first thing I looked at is Geekbench 6, which is now a much longer, harder test. In terms of single core score, the Mac Pro actually beats out the Mac Studio, and this was consistent. And in multi-core, I saw the same exact thing. I don't know if Apple is just clocking this a little bit higher or why we have that difference, but is consistent. Now, I decided to push these machines to their limits, and I did. But first, I want to let you know that this video is brought to you by Static. They have their 360 universal magnetic charge cable that makes it really fast and easy to charge different devices with just one cable. And now they have the Snap and Go magnetic charging power bank that attaches to the same connector, allowing you to use it with your Lightning iPhone, USB Type-C iPads, and even micro USB devices, and then later with the USB-C iPhone 15. It is small and really lightweight, has 3,000 milliamps of power, and just like the cables, the prices are great. Get the best price using the link below and charge everything with just one cable. Running Cinebench R23 to push the CPUs to their limits, I saw that the Mac Pro once again was scoring higher, almost 1,000 more points. Now, I also saw that the Mac Studio was actually using a bit more power to do a lower score compared to the Mac Pro. Now, I did the 10-minute stress test, and I really clearly and carefully monitored the temperatures, then the fan speeds, and the Mac Studio actually ran hotter, hitting 85 Celsius at peak compared to 76 Celsius. Now, the interesting thing is both of these ran completely at idle on the fan speeds. The Mac Pro has one of the fans that runs slightly above constantly no matter what, but the cooling systems on both do great. Throwing some graphics in the mix, we tested out Figma, which is a 3D design app, and this project was brought to us by 500 Designs, one of the best studios in California. Zooming in, we're seeing the same performance. We have a little bit of stuttering, but refreshing is fast, and the performance is very similar to even an M2 MacBook Air as far as moving around. Now, I exported this high resolution 12 web pages of this website, and the time was identical on both systems. And this uses some CPU and GPU, so that was interesting, even though the Mac Studio has the upgraded graphics. Now, next, I wanted to do some graphics testing, so I ran 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme, and the 60-core Mac Studio got 221.9 FPS compared to 276.4. So that is a difference of about 25% more graphics performance with the 76 core. Of course, you can get that on the Studio as well. But what was interesting is that the Mac Pro only used about 7% more wattage to get that performance. And that once again makes me think, did they kind of optimize the wattage or the power something with this a little bit differently? And how does the higher Ultra compare in this one? Now, as far as temperatures, they are both very low and the fans don't spin up. So I needed something that's gonna push it even harder. Before, we'd use the 8K Canon RAW export that would max out CPU and GPU, But with these new M2 Ultras, they do such a great job that they're no longer maxing it out. Now thankfully, Lightroom Classic is very optimized now. It uses a ton of the graphics, and in fact, both the CPU and the GPUs are practically maxed out. The CPU goes up and down a tiny bit, but this pushes the biggest strain that I've seen in a real world app. I exported 500 42 megapixel edited raw images. The Mac Studio took 3 minutes and 14 seconds. That is blazing fast, but the Mac Pro took the same amount of time. There was literally no difference at all. And that didn't make sense because we have better graphics in here. But maybe it's something where now the CPU is a bit of the limitation and you get no more performance on a system where directly, this is a $4,000 difference, twice the price. Now, I also looked at the temperatures, and the highest CPU temperature we saw was 75 Celsius on the Mac Studio and 76 Celsius on the Mac Pro. Yes, actually slightly higher. And as far as graphics, we had 55 Celsius on the Mac Studio and 58 on the Mac Pro. Yes, it does run slightly hotter, which is absolutely crazy. Now, we made thermal video of both, and on the Mac Studio, you see that even maxing out with the CPU and the GPU, the heat is only on the back. The cooler is incredible in there, and it gets all that heat out very quickly. And on the Mac Pro, looking at it, the biggest heat point was not actually where the CPU heatsink is. It was lower over here on the motherboard kind of area, and with both fans idle. So both of these systems, when you kick them up a lot and you push it as far as it can, they are silent and they don't have any issues with cooling. Now, the system on here is overkill, it's silent, but listen to what happens when we max out the fans manually. Yeah, this thing turns into a jet engine, but thankfully, this system was designed for a 28-core Intel that draws insane power, many graphics cards, and now it doesn't really even need it. And really, the only fan that's doing something is that top one. Here, air's blowing into nothing, and even on the back, we have all these covers that are blocking airflow. So it's a very weird design, and it is absolutely overkill. So from my thermal testing, you really don't see a difference even with such a small and compact design, and I believe that this is really the new Mac Pro. Apple wanted the old Cube Mac that didn't do very well, got too hot to be a powerful Mac, and then they wanted the trash can that had thermal issues, and thankfully now that they're making their own chips, they are so efficient, especially for the power, that you don't need something like this even for thermals. Now, of course, we have those PCI slots, but because everything's moved forward, a lot of extra, even sound devices, they have Thunderbolt versions, you don't need those slots. And even though you can upgrade the SSDs, the price tag is insane. You're way cheaper getting external storage or getting a PCI card inside of here. So from what I've seen, this thing is major overkill. It's priced way higher. They just priced it high enough so that only the people that need it will buy it. And the Mac Studio just is a gem of a machine. And with this being this high, it basically just gets more people to accept the price tag of this thing and be willing to buy it. And I've already seen that based off of your guys' comments. So you guys let me know your thoughts on this Mac Pro. We are gonna be making a comparison between the 60-core M2 Ultra and the 76-core. Now that we know the thermals don't make a difference between these, and I've looked at other people's videos to show you if that extra $1,000 is worth upgrading. Go ahead and click that circle above. I'm gonna be doing a comparison against my $15,000 Intel version. That'll be fun. Check out that video, and I'll see you in the next one.